There are more orcs in the galaxy than there are humans. Not close. Vastly more. Trillions of them, spread across more worlds than the Imperium has ever counted. And every single one of them believes the same two things without ever being taught: that red goes faster, and that the Emperor of mankind is a living god who fights forever. We laugh at the first one. We should be terrified of the second. Because orcs are not like us. When enough orcs believe a thing, the thing becomes real. Their guns fire because they expect them to. Their painted red trucks genuinely move faster. Their gods, Gork and Mork, are real because a species willed them into the warp. This is documented. This is canon. So here is the question that should keep the High Lords of Terra awake. If belief is what makes an orc god real, and the entire orc species believes the Emperor is alive and fighting, then what, exactly, is keeping the thing on the golden throne from finally, completely dying?
The Imperium thinks it's the throne. It might be the orcs. Let me pin 4 words before we go any further, because the audience that knows this setting will not forgive me if I fumble them, and the channel's most watched video got buried in complaints about exactly this. Astronomicon. Astro-nom-I-can. The psychic beacon on Terra. Gork. 1 syllable, hard G. Mork. Same, with an M. And the big one. Wah. Not a word you say politely. It is a roar with a spelling. 3 letters of vowel and a wall of consonant. And it is the closest thing the orcs have to a national anthem, a religion, and a power grid all at once. Hold those 4. We are going to need every one of them. Now, the mechanism. Forget the comedy for a moment, because the comedy is the trap. The red paint is the thing that makes you stop taking this seriously. And the whole point of tonight is that you should never have stopped. Here is the documented rule, straight out of Codex, Orks. The orcs possess a collective psychic ability, not individually. One orc on his own is a weak psyker, barely a flicker in the warp. But orcs do not come one at a time. They come in tides. And the rule is this: when enough orcs believe something is true, it becomes true, pushed out of their skulls and into real space through the Imperium by the sheer mass of green conviction. The power of that field is directly proportional to the number of greenskins standing in one place. 10 orcs believing a thing is nothing. 10,000 orcs believing a thing bends the air. 10 million believing a thing rewrites what is physically possible in the space they occupy. This is why the red ones really do go faster. It is not a joke the writers tell. It is a load-bearing rule of the universe. An orc paints his truck red. He believes, with the flat, unquestioning certainty of a creature that has never once doubted itself, that red things move faster. And because 100,000 of his cousins believe the exact same thing, in the exact same way, his ramshackle, half-welded, structurally impossible vehicle holds together long enough to actually move faster. The belief generates the warp energy. The warp energy supplies what the engineering cannot. The same rule explains the guns. An orc gun is, by any sane assessment, a death trap of mismatched parts that should explode in the user's hands. It fires anyway. It fires because the orc holding it has no concept that it might not. And here is the detail that should have frightened you the first time you heard it. Take that same gun, hand it to a human, and it stops working. The weapon was never powered by gunpowder. It was powered by belief, and the human doesn't have the right kind. And the scaling is the part that should change how you read every battle report you've ever heard. Because the rule isn't that belief works. The rule is that belief works in proportion to how many of them are believing, in one place, at one time. A lone orc can't bend anything. A mob can warp a little. But a full wah, A green tide 1,000,000 strong, 10,000,000 strong, rolling across a world with one shared certainty humming through every skull. That is a psychic pressure front, and inside its radius the laws bend toward whatever the Orks already assume. Their machines hold, their odds improve, their gods lean closer. This is why a Wa that's winning becomes almost impossible to stop. Victory feeds the belief feeds the field makes the next victory easier, and the loop tightens. The Orks don't just fight harder when they're winning. The universe around them quite literally starts to agree with them. Sit with that. The Ork is a creature whose conviction is a physical force, whose certainty has mass. The most ridiculous species in the galaxy, the green-skinned punchline of 40,000 years of grimdark, is quietly the single most powerful engine of applied belief that this setting has ever produced. And the Imperium has spent its entire existence trying to scrub them off the star map without ever once asking what all that conviction might be holding up. We treat the Orks as a logistics problem, a pest control problem, a matter of how many bolt rounds it takes to clear a continent. Nobody at the top has ever sat with the harder possibility that the green tide isn't only a thing the Imperium has to survive. It might be a thing the Imperium can't survive without. Here's where it stops being theory. Because if you want proof that mass Ork belief generates something real and permanent, not a faster truck, not a gun that shouldn't fire, but an actual, persistent, warp-dwelling entity, you do not have to reach. The Orks have already done it. Twice. Their names are Gork and Mork. Walk through how the gods of the greenskins came to exist, because it is the cleanest demonstration in all of 40,000 years that belief, at scale, manufactures reality. The lore is explicit on this. The Ork species' collective unconsciousness registers in the Imperium exactly the way the collective psyche of humanity does, exactly the way the Eldaris once did. And out of that great green ocean of simple, brutal, identical minds, two shapes coalesced, two entities the Orks worship as gods. Gork, who is brutal but Kunin. Mork, who is Kunin but brutal. The Orks themselves cannot agree which is which, and they have fought wars over the question, which tells you something about the believers but nothing about the truth of the gods, because the gods are real either way. And the canon does not soften this. It puts Gork and Mork in the same sentence, the same category, the same metaphysical weight class as the chaos gods, as the lost pantheon of the Eldari, as, and here is the line you should circle, the faith-empowered soul of the Emperor of mankind himself. The text lists them together, four expressions of the same single phenomenon. A god is what happens when a vast number of minds believe the same thing hard enough, for long enough, in the warp. Gork and Mork were not handed down. They were not summoned by some dark ritual. They were dreamed into existence by a species too stupid to know it was performing the most powerful psychic act in the galaxy. And once you've seen that, you can't unsee what it implies about the warp itself. The Imperium is not a neutral void. It is a mirror, a sea that takes the shape of whatever the living press into it. Humanity's terrors and hopes curdled into the chaos gods. The Eldari's passions birthed a pantheon, and then birthed the thing that devoured most of it. And the Orks, with their flat, cheerful, unbreakable certainty, pushed two gods into that sea simply by existing in numbers and meaning it. The lesson the Imperium refuses to learn from its own theology is that the warp does not check credentials. It does not care whether the believers are wise or foolish, holy or monstrous, human or green. It only counts the conviction. And by that measure, by the only measure the warp actually uses, The Orks are not a lesser people. They are, quite possibly, the loudest congregation in the galaxy. There is a beautiful, dangerous ambiguity buried here, and the lore leaves it open on purpose. Did the gods come first, with the Orks made in their image? Or did the Orks come first, and their belief plus their Wa energy build the gods afterward? An Ork named Grotznik insisted it was the second, that Orkish belief and Wa energy created the gods, full stop. The Codex declines to settle it.
But notice what even the uncertainty concedes. Nobody in the lore disputes that the connection runs both ways, that belief and God feed each other in a loop. The Orks believe. The belief becomes Gork and Mork. Gork and Mork's power flows back down through the Ork psychers, the weird boys, who blaze with it and channel it back into the tide. A closed circuit of conviction, a perpetual motion machine made of faith. And here is the part nobody wants to say out loud because it breaks the comfortable wall between Orks and everything else. Nothing about that rule is limited to gods the Orks happen to name. The mechanism does not check the target. The mechanism does not ask whether the thing being believed in is called Gork or Mork or something else entirely. It is a generator. It produces warp-real consequences from mass conviction, and it does not care what the conviction is aimed at. Hold that thought. We are about to aim it somewhere the Imperium would execute you for pointing.
So what exactly do the Orks believe about the Emperor? Here is where I have to be honest with you, because this channel does not sell you certainty it hasn't earned. The plain truth is that most individual Orks barely register that the Emperor exists at all. They've seen the cathedrals. Humans build enormous shrines to some invisible boss, and shrines are full of shiny things worth looting, so the Orks have noticed the man the way you notice weather. That's the floor. That's the conservative reading, and I'm putting it on the table first so you know I'm not hiding it. But look at how the Orks treat war itself, and a different shape comes through. The Orks do not hate the Emperor the way the Inquisition imagines an enemy hating a god. To an Ork, the highest thing in existence is a good scrap against a worthy foe, and the Imperium of man, the Emperor's Imperium, has been the best, longest, most gloriously unending scrap in the entire galaxy for 10,000 years.
The Orks keep coming back, not despite the Emperor, because of him. Because somewhere in the green collective mind, the Imperium reads as the war that never ends, fought in the name of a god warrior who never stays down, who always returns for one more fight. And there is canon precedent for that picture, etched into imperial record at the Battle of Gyros Thravian, back in the Great Crusade, when 3 Primarchs, Horus, Mortarion, and Rogel Dorn, were on the edge of defeat against the Ork warlord Garkle Blackfang, and the Emperor himself descended with 1,000 of his custodians and ended the warlord atop a ruined Gargant. 3 custodians fell that day. Their names were engraved on the Emperor's own armor. The Orks met the Emperor in person, once, and what they met was a god warrior who fought at the front and walked away. That is precisely the kind of memory the Green Collective keeps. Think about what that battle actually planted.
The Orks who survived Gyros Thravian carried away a memory.
An Ork memory is not a private thing. It leaks into the collective, into the gestalt, into the green ocean that builds gods. What they carried away was the image of a single golden figure who walked into the worst of the fight, ended their mightiest warlord with his own hands, and left under his own power. To an Ork, that is not a defeat to be ashamed of. That is the highest compliment the species can pay, a foe worth coming back for, the most worthy scrap of all. And a species that builds its gods out of shared conviction had just been handed, firsthand,
the template of a god warrior who fights at the front and does not stay down. That template did not die when the battle ended. Templates like that are exactly what the Ork collective keeps. Now run the rule forward.
If the Ork war ethos broadcasts at the scale of an entire species across an entire galaxy, the steady conviction that there is a never-dying God King worth fighting forever, then functionally, whether or not a single Ork could name him, the largest contiguous block of belief in the galaxy is pointed at the proposition that the Emperor is alive and active and gets back up. No ecclesiarchy choir could match that volume. No cardinal-led world of weeping pilgrims comes within a fraction of the broadcast power of trillions of greenskins treating the Imperium's god as the great eternal enemy. The Imperium thinks its faith is the loudest signal in the warp. It might be drowned out by the people it's trying to exterminate. And this is where the canon refuses to print the next sentence. So we have to be the ones to write it carefully. Because I want to flag something honestly right here, before you let yourself get carried off by how clean that sounds. What I have just done is connect two rules that Games Workshop has confirmed separately and never once joined together. The Orks make real what they believe. Confirmed. The Emperor is a thing partly sustained by belief. Also confirmed. The link between them, the idea that Ork belief is feeding the Emperor's persistence, is not stated anywhere in canon. It is a synthesis. It is the most provocative reading of two true premises, and it is not a documented fact, and you deserve to know which one of those you're holding. We'll come back to the strongest argument against it because there's a good one. But first I have to show you why the synthesis is even tempting, and for that we have to cross to the human side of the ledger. Because the Emperor's own life support runs on exactly this fuel. Open Dan Abnett's The Master of Mankind, the 2016 novel that is the closest thing the setting has to a clinical autopsy of what the man on the throne actually is. The picture it paints is not of a sleeping king. It is of a warp entity, a psychic presence so vast that his shattered, failing body is almost beside the point. The body is the part that's dying, and the warp soul is the part that's growing stronger every year. And what feeds that growth? The lore says it plainly, and it says it as the central irony of the entire Imperium. The Emperor, the man who banned all worship, who outlawed every shrine and silenced every priest he could reach because he despised superstition. That man is being turned into a literal god by the never-ceasing worship of the trillions who pray to him. He didn't want it. It's happening anyway. Belief is reshaping him into the very thing he forbade. And the most visible machine that runs on this fuel is the Astronomicon, the great psychic beacon that the Emperor projects from within the Golden Throne, the lighthouse without which the Imperium's ships are blind in the warp, and the whole interstellar empire goes dark. Here is the detail that matters tonight. The Astronomicon was originally powered by the Emperor alone, but the cost outgrew even him, and so the duty was shifted onto a choir, 10,000 psychers, the chosen, their life forces poured into the beacon, while the Emperor acts as the lens that focuses their raw output into one coherent signal. Roughly 1,000 psychers a day, fed into the dark beneath the palace, spent down to nothing to keep the light lit and the master of mankind anchored in the world. Without the choir, even the Emperor's mind isn't enough. Without the Emperor, the choir's energy is just noise. The Imperium's central article of faith is, mechanically, a belief engine, a vast apparatus for converting human psychic conviction into the continued existence of a god. Now hold the two systems side by side because the symmetry is the whole argument. On one side, the human apparatus, 10,000 psychers and the prayers of an empire, an enormous, expensive, blood-soaked machine built to feed belief energy into the Emperor and keep him anchored. On the other side, the Ork apparatus. No machine, no choir, no cost, just trillions of greenskins generating raw, warp-real conviction as a byproduct of simply existing. The most efficient belief generator the galaxy has ever produced, running for free, all the time, pointed loosely but relentlessly at the idea of the never-dying god of the great eternal war. The Imperium pays 1,000 souls a day for its trickle. The Orks produce a flood and don't even notice they're doing it.
If belief energy is the currency that keeps the thing on the throne from finishing its long death, and the lore says, for the human side, that it is, then the question stops being absurd and starts being unbearable. Who's actually paying the larger share? Let me plant the flag again so it doesn't slip past you in the dark. This parallel is the engine of the whole thesis, and it is still a parallel, not a proof. The canon connects human belief to the Emperor's persistence. It does not connect Ork belief to it. I am holding the two cables an inch apart and asking you to notice they're the same gauge. That inch is where the honesty lives. Keep your hand on it. So suppose, just suppose, that somewhere in the Imperium somebody worked this out. Suppose an inquisitor, generations ago, followed the same two cables to the same inch of gap and could not stop staring at it. What would that knowledge do to him? It would not make him want to exterminate the Orks. It would make him afraid to. This is the angle the channel's earlier attempt got wrong. And it's worth saying why, because the failure is instructive. The previous version made the Inquisition the agent, the schemer, the prime mover, the secret hand using the Orks as a tool. And that's backwards, and the audience felt it was backwards, which is why almost nobody watched. The Orkish Gestalt field is not a tool the Inquisition built. It is a force of nature the Inquisition would, at most, be terrified into managing. The engine is green, and it runs on its own. The most the Imperium could ever be is the caretaker who quietly makes sure the engine is never switched off. And caretaking, here, would look exactly like Imperial policy already looks. Think about it. The Imperium has had 10,000 years and the firepower of a galaxy. It has scoured worlds to glass. It has wiped out species. And yet the Orks are still everywhere. Still uncountable. Still the one Xenos threat the Imperium has never seriously dented. And the official story is that the Orks are simply too numerous, too resilient, too fast-breeding to finish off. Maybe. Or maybe there is a thin, deniable seam of doctrine, never written down, passed mouth to mouth at the highest levels that says, contain them, push them back, bleed them on 1,000 worlds, but never, ever finish the job. Manage the green tide, never drain it, because a force you've decided is load-bearing is a force you keep standing, even if you can't say out loud what it's holding up. The eternal Ork War reframed, not as the Imperium's greatest failure, but as its most successful and most secret act of preservation, a permanent life support system woven out of the body of the enemy. And look at how perfectly the cover would write itself. An inquisitor who knew this could never explain it. The knowledge itself would be the deadliest heresy imaginable. That the corpse god's persistence might be propped up by the Xenos the entire Imperium is sworn to exterminate. You couldn't put it in a report. You couldn't argue it before the High Lords. You couldn't even hint at it without inviting the pyre. So the policy would have to disguise itself as exactly what the Imperium already believes about itself, that it is too vast and too slow and too bureaucratic to ever finish a war, that the Orks simply breed faster than they can be cleared, that the eternal campaign grinds on because that's just how the Imperium is. The most effective secret in the galaxy would be one that hides inside the Imperium's own incompetence. Nobody hunts for a conspiracy when failure already explains everything.
The greenskins never quite get exterminated. The Crusades never quite finish. And 10,000 years roll by with the light staying on and nobody ever asking why the one war the Imperium is genuinely capable of ending is the one war it somehow never does. I want to be careful even here, because this is the part where a worse channel would tell you it's confirmed. It isn't. There is no leaked inquisitorial memo. This is the shape the policy would take if the synthesis were true, offered as the logical consequence of the reading, not as a fact in the record. The eternal war is real. The interpretation of why it never ends is ours. But ride the logic to its end, because the end is where it turns from dreadful to genuinely vertiginous. And there's a comment under the original video, sitting at 1,500 likes, that found this edge before I did. The reading that the Imperium's dream of victory might be the worst thing that could happen to it. We are trained, all of us, to want the Orks gone. They are the green tide, the vermin, the mistake, and every Imperial citizen's deepest fantasy is the final crusade, the last great push, the day the last greenskin falls and the galaxy is clean. Picture that day actually arriving. Picture the Orks broken at last, their tides scattered, their numbers finally driven below the threshold where the Gestalt field can hold, the point where there simply aren't enough of them left in one place to make anything real anymore. The red trucks stop going faster. The impossible guns fall silent. Gork and Mork, starved of believers, thin out into nothing. And the largest block of belief in the galaxy, the one that was broadcasting the never-dying god of the eternal war into the warp at a volume no choir could match, that signal cuts out. What happens to the thing on the throne when the loudest voice still insisting he lives finally goes quiet? If even a fraction of his persistence was riding on that signal, then the galaxy's great victory would not free the Emperor. It would let him finish dying. The crusade everyone dreams of would be the act that lowers him the rest of the way into the grave the throne has been holding him out of for 10,000 years. The enemy was never just the leash. The enemy was the lifeline. The Orks are the thing the Imperium claws at to be free of, and the thing it cannot survive the loss of, at the same time, in the same green mass, for the same reason. Break them, and you might not be saving the Emperor. You might be switching him off. And the canon has already shown us a dress rehearsal for what a unified Ork threat does to Terra, so we know the scale isn't invented. Open Dan Abnett's I Am Slaughter. And I'll name that title exactly as Abnett wrote it, because it's the real name of a real book and I won't dress it up. The novel that opens The Beast Arises, the 12-book series set in the 32nd millennium, when the Orks return united under a single war boss called the Beast. And the threat is so total that the Imperial fists abandon the walls of Terra for the first time in over 1,000 years. That's what a focused Ork tide does to the heart of the Imperium. Now imagine that same mass, that same scale of green conviction, not pointed at Terra's walls but simply existing, all the time, a permanent psychic weather system the Imperium has lived inside so long it can no longer feel it. We notice the Orks when they attack. We have never once thought to ask what they're doing the rest of the time, simply by being trillion strong and absolutely, immovably certain about everything. And the certainty is the part you can't argue with. Read Mike Brooks's Brutal Canon, first published in 2020, the first novel ever written from inside an Ork's head. You ride along behind the eyes of an Ork named Ufthak as his wad tears across a forge world, And the genius of it is that you stop seeing the absurdity from the outside and start living inside the belief. The gun works because Uthak has never once entertained the thought that it might not. The Imperial war machines are just Hume walkers. The whole impossible green physics holds together because not one mind in the tide has ever cracked open a single doubt. That is what makes the Ork belief engine so much more powerful than ours. Human faith wavers. Humans hedge and question and lose their nerve in the dark. The 1,000 psychers a day that the Imperium feeds into the throne are the measure of how leaky human conviction is. It takes that much raw sacrifice to keep a signal lit that doubt is forever trying to put out. An Ork's certainty has no leak in it anywhere.
There is no doubt to subsidize, no faltering to compensate for, no dark night of the soul in which a greenskin wonders whether red really is faster. The belief just runs, clean and total, every waking second of every Ork that has ever lived, and it costs the Orks nothing, because for them, it isn't faith at all. It's just the obvious truth about how the world works. When a species like that decides the galaxy contains a god warrior who fights forever and never stays down, that is not a hope. To the warp, it is a fact, asserted at a volume and a constancy that no church of doubting men could ever produce. Which brings us back to the inch of gap, and I'm going to hand it to you honestly one last time before the end, because the strongest objection deserves the last clean word before the irony lands.
The single best argument against everything I've laid out tonight is this. The Astronomicon and the throne and the Emperor's whole life support apparatus are canonically powered by the Emperor and 10,000 human psychers and the machinery of the Golden Throne. And no Ork is named anywhere in that mechanism. Not once. The record is explicit about the choir and silent about the greenskins. And the second best argument is the one I gave you near the top. Most Orks don't even know the Emperor exists, and belief is supposed to need a believer who actually holds the thought. Those are real. They are not weak. A reasonable person who knows this setting can stand on them and say the whole thesis is a clever overreach, and they would not be wrong to. I'm not going to pretend otherwise to make the ending hit harder. The honest position is that this is two true rules placed beside each other until they look like one. The most provocative reading available, and a reading is what it is.
But here's the thing about a reading that won't let go of you. It survives the counter-argument. Even if Ork belief isn't holding the Emperor up at all, the symmetry remains. That the Imperium pours 1,000 souls a day into belief fuel to keep its god anchored, while the enemy it's exterminating produces the same fuel for free, by the trillion, pointed at the same dark proposition, and not one High Lord has ever asked whether the green tide is a threat or a power supply. That question doesn't need the thesis to be true to be terrifying. It only needs the two rules to be real. And they are, both of them, documented, canon. The Imperium has burned 1,000 worlds and 10,000 years trying to wipe out the Orks. It calls them vermin, a green tide, a mistake of the old gods. But the Orks believe, with the absolute certainty of a species that bends reality with its mind, that the Emperor of mankind is alive and fighting forever.
And in this galaxy, what the Orks believe hard enough becomes true. So the next time the Imperium claims it is one great crusade away from finally exterminating the greenskins, remember what that victory might actually cost. The Emperor isn't being kept alive by the faithful. He's being kept alive by the enemy. And the day the last Ork stops believing in him is the day he finally gets to die.